The silence in a Manhattan elevator at 6 p.m. isn't just an absence of noise. It's a high-tensioned wire stretched between people who are terrified of what might happen if the persona slipped, even for a second. We call it being social, but Jung would have recognized it as a collective performance of the most exhausting kind. It's the constant, rhythmic adjustment of the mask to ensure that the social grease keeps the gears turning. But eventually, the metal starts to grind, and you realize that your antisocial impulse isn't a defect of character, but a frantic signal from the self that the farce has become toxic. You aren't retreating because you hate humanity. You are retreating because you can no longer breathe in the vacuum of the superficial. There is a specific kind of cold that settles in the bones when you realize you've spent 3 hours at a dinner party nodding at shadows, speaking in scripts that were written decades ago by people you don't even like. Jung understood that the persona is necessary, it's the bridge, but when the bridge becomes the only place you live, you're just a ghost haunting your own life. To refuse the farce is to acknowledge that the gregarious demand of modern American life is often just a sophisticated way of avoiding the terrifying quiet of the interior. When you stop playing along, the others call it withdrawal or isolation, but from the inside, it feels like the first honest breath you've taken in years. A slow, deliberate walk back toward the center of the forest, where the spirits don't care about your job title or your ability to make small talk about the weather in Chicago. We are told that belonging is the ultimate goal, yet we ignore the price of admission, which is so often the amputation of our own complexity. So you sit in the car for 20 minutes before going inside. You let the phone ring. You look at the invitation and feel a physical weight in your chest. That isn't pathology. It's the psyche's immune system rejecting a foreign body. It's the realization that if you say, "one more fine," thanks to a question that wasn't actually asked, something essential in you might simply evaporate. There is a specific, biting irony in the way we use the word connection while standing in a room full of people. It's like trying to find water in a mirage. Jung saw this coming. This slow erosion of the individual by the weight of the mass men, where being social is confused with being compliant. When you refuse to participate in the farce, you aren't just opting out of a conversation. You are staging a quiet revolution against the collective demand for mediocrity. The pressure to be on is a form of psychic violence that we've normalized, a constant radiation that bleeds the color out of the soul until everything is a flat, manageable gray. I think about those winter nights in New England where the frost cracks the wood of the house. That sound is honest. It's the sound of something solid meeting an external force. Most of our social interactions lack that honesty. They are padded with cotton wool to ensure no one feels the chill of the actual human condition. We've built a culture that pathologizes the hermit, yet the hermit is often the only one who actually knows where he ends and the world begins. Jung would have sighed at our modern diagnostic manuals that label a preference for depth over breadth as a disorder. He knew that the soul doesn't speak in sound bites or elevated pitches. It speaks in the long, uncomfortable pauses that occur when you stop pretending to be interested in the bin. The farce isn't just the small talk. It's the underlying agreement that we will all pretend the abyss isn't staring back at us. When you walk away from that agreement, you become a mirror. And people rarely forgive a mirror for showing them their own emptiness. It's easier for them to call you antisocial than to admit that they are terrified of the silence that follows when the music stops. This refusal is an act of preservation. It's the realization that your energy is a finite resource, a sacred oil that shouldn't be wasted on lighting up a stage for a play you didn't write and don't believe in. You are hoarding your light, not out of greed, but because you are preparing for a much longer, much more solitary journey into the parts of yourself that the farce would rather you forget. Those damp, unlit corners where the real work happens. The cost of this refusal is often a profound, echoing loneliness that feels less like a choice and more like a sentence. But Jung understood that this wilderness is the only place where the voice of the self can actually be heard over the roar of the crowd. We live in a society that treats solitude as a failure of the ego, a glitch in the social software. Yet the farce requires you to be a stranger to yourself so that you can be a neighbor to everyone else. Think of the texture of a conversation that actually matters. It's rough, it's unpredictable, it has the grit of real earth. The farce, by contrast, is polished plastic. It's the "how are you" that expects nuance, the "we should get coffee" that acts as a polite goodbye. To stop participating is to admit that you are starving at a feast of crumbs. Jung might have suggested that this withdrawal is actually a form of incubation, a pulling back of the libido from the external world to fuel the fire of individual. It looks like checking out to the person obsessed with the outward performance. But to the one doing the work, it's a radical checking in. You aren't being antisocial. You are being pro-sol. There is a dignity in the no that most people are too frightened to utter because they fear that if they stop dancing, the floor will vanish beneath them. And perhaps it will. Perhaps the floor of the farce should vanish. There's a certain relief in the fall, in finally hitting the bedrock of your own isolation and realizing that it's solid. It's the difference between being lost in a crowd and being found in the desert. The desert doesn't demand a performance. The sun in Nevada doesn't care about your social standing. It just bakes everything down to its essence. When you refuse the farce, you are choosing that heat. You are choosing to be stripped of the ornamental until only what is indestructible remains. It's a lonely path, yes, but it's the only one that doesn't lead back to the mirror where you no longer recognize the face looking back at you. We spend the first half of our lives learning the script, and if we are lucky or, perhaps, just exhausted enough, we spend the second half burning it, piece by piece, watching the flames and finally feeling the warmth of something real. Perhaps the most unsettling part of stepping away from the footlights is the realization that the farce isn't just out there in the cocktail parties and the corporate boardrooms. It's a parasite that has burrowed into the way we talk to ourselves. Jung would have recognized that the most dangerous performance is the one we give for an internal audience of ghosts, the introjected voices of parents, teachers, and a culture that demands we remain productive and agreeable even as our inner world turns to ash. When you stop participating, the silence that follows isn't peaceful at first. It's deafening. It's the sound of the machine idling without a task. You realize that your antisocial behavior is actually a form of psychic sabotage. You are breaking the machine because the machine was designed to grind your shadow into something palatable for public consumption. There is a specific kind of light in a room when you sit alone and refuse to distract yourself. A thin, gray light that doesn't lie. It's the light of the negredo, the blackening, where the fake gold of your social identity begins to tarnish and peel. It's painful to watch the popular or successful version of yourself die of neglect. But Jung understood that without this death, there is no rebirth. You aren't withdrawing into a void, you are retreating into the temenos, the sacred precinct where the ego is no longer the master of ceremonies. The farce demands that we be transparent, accessible, and connected at all times, leaving no room for the mystery, no room for the secret that shouldn't be told. By refusing to play, you are reclaiming your right to be opaque, to be a forest with deep, dark places where no one else is invited to walk. It's a reclamation of the soul's privacy. In an age that treats privacy as a suspicious act, people will tell you that you're missing out, but they never quite specify what it is you're missing. Usually, it's just another opportunity to forget who you are in exchange for a temporary sense of safety. But that safety is a lie, and once you've seen the scaffolding behind a curtain, you can never quite unsee it. You are left with a choice: to be a well-adjusted inhabitant of a delusion or a lonely inhabitant of the truth. Jung didn't promise that the truth would make us happy, only that it would make us whole, and wholeness has no need for a script. In the end, the farce survives on a very specific kind of fuel: the dread of being irrelevant. We are conditioned to believe that if we aren't reflected in the eyes of the collective, we might simply cease to exist. A terrifying prospect for the ego, which thrives on the applause of the gallery. But Jung would have recognized this disappearing act as the beginning of the opus. When you refuse to participate, you are essentially saying that your existence is no longer up for debate or validation by the committee. It's a move from the horizontal plane of social maneuvering to the vertical plane of depth. This shift feels like a heavy, leaden descent, like walking into the basement of an old house where the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten things. It's not antisocial to prefer the company of your own complexes over the hollow chatter of a networking event. It's a matter of psychic survival. You are choosing the heavy, uncarved stone over the polished, empty vessel. There is a profound stillness that comes when you realize that you no longer care if you're understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding themselves. This is the moment the outsider archetype ceases to be a burden and becomes a sanctuary. You begin to find a different kind of kinship, not with those who share your hobbies or your tax bracket, but with those who have also looked at the mask and found it wanting. It's a smaller circle, much smaller, and the air is thinner there, but it's real. You find yourself standing in the middle of a crowded room, watching the gestures, hearing the practiced laughs, and instead of feeling bitterness, you feel a strange, detached compassion. You see the effort, you see the strain of the performance, and you realize that your refusal isn't an act of hostility. It's a quiet invitation to yourself to finally come home. The farce will go on without you. The lights will stay bright, and the actors will continue their lines. But you are already out the door, walking into the cool, dark night where the only voice you have to answer to is the one that has been waiting in the silence all along. It's not a tragedy to be alone. It's a tragedy to be together and still be missing. Jung might have looked at our digital ages, frantic, flickering insistence on engagement, and seen a literalization of the hungry ghosts. We are terrified of being unfollowed, which is just a modern, clinical way of saying we are terrified of being cast out of the tribal circle. But there is a secret power in being the one who walks away from the fire to sit in the dark. It is only in that darkness that the eyes finally adjust, and you start to see the shapes of the gods that the campfire light was drowning out. The farce insists that everything be lit, documented, and shared, leaving no room for the secretum, that private kernel of the soul that must remain unshared if it is to remain alive. When you refuse to participate, you are protecting that kernel. You are letting the soil settle. I think of the silence of a library after the doors are locked, that weight of unread wisdom that doesn't need a witness to be true. That is what you become when you stop performing. You become a repository of your own history. The people who call you antisocial are often just grieving the loss of your utility. You are no longer a mirror for their own masks, no longer a supporting character in their personal dramas. That can be a lonely realization, to see that many of your connections were merely contracts of mutual distraction. But you wouldn't have us weep over that. He would have us recognize it as the thinning of the herd that precedes the discovery of the path. The path isn't found in the we. It's found in the I that has survived the we. It's the difference between the noise of the city and the vibration of the mountain. One is a distraction. The other is a resonance. And as you stand there, refusing to play the part, you might find that you aren't alone at all. You are simply in better company. You are with the ancestors, the archetypes, and the long, slow rhythms of the earth that were here before the farce began and will be here long after the last curtain falls. You are finally, perhaps for the first time, participating in something that is actually happening, rather than something that is merely being staged. There is a specific kind of vertigo that comes with this final stripping away. It's the realization that once you stop being useful to the collective, you become invisible. And for the first time in your life, invisibility feels like a superpower rather than a wound. Jung would have recognized this as the movement toward this, the wise elder who no longer seeks to please the king because he has seen too many kings turn to dust. In the farce, visibility is a trap. It's a leash made of expectations and likes and social obligations that keep you tethered to a version of yourself that was born in a marketing meeting. When you accept being invisible, you finally gain the freedom to move through the world as a ghost, observing the machinery without being caught in the gears. You start to notice the small, quiet things that the performers miss. The way the light hits a brick wall in the late afternoon. The precise texture of a stranger's genuine grief. The heavy, unspoken history of a landscape. These are the rewards of the antisocial life. They are the crumbs of reality that the farce discards because they aren't content and they can't be sold. We live in a culture that is terrified of the dead air, the moments where nothing is being said and no one is being entertained. But Jung knew that the dead air is where the unconscious does its best work. It's in the static, it's in the boredom, it's in the refusal to be an influence or a brand. You are opting for a life that is deep and narrow rather than wide and shallow. It is a terrifying trade-off for the ego, which wants to be everything to everyone, but it is the only trade-off that allows you to be something to yourself. The farce is a loud, bright room where everyone is shouting to be heard over everyone else. You've simply stepped out into the hallway, closed the door, and found that the hallway goes on forever, and that the air out here is finally, mercifully cold. You are an antisocial. You've just finished your part. And now, the real play begins. The one where the audience is empty. The stage is gone. And you are finally, terrifyingly, alone with the author. The silence that follows the closing of that door. It's not an empty silence, is it? It's dense, crowded, quiet. Jung would have smiled at the paradox that by abandoning society, you've actually entered the most populated room in existence. In the farce, you are lonely because you are playing a role for people who are also playing roles. It's a hall of mirrors reflecting nothing but the glass itself. But in this withdrawal, you begin to encounter the others within. The figures of the deep psyche, the ones that were drowned out by the noise of the office and the insistent ping of the notification, finally start to emerge from the tree line. They don't want your social grace. They don't care about your curated persona or your antisocial reputation. They want your blood. They want your attention. They want to show you the things you buried so deep you forgot you even owned a shovel. This is the stage of the work where the American obsession with getting back out there feels like a form of madness. Why would you go back to the fluorescent lights when you've finally started to see in the dark? There is a profound dignity in the person who can stand in a grocery store line in a suburb of Ohio and feel completely, utterly alien, not because they are better, but because they are no longer vibrating at the frequency of the machine. You become a sleeper agent of the self. You still buy the milk, you still pay the taxes, but your true life is happening elsewhere. In the dreams, in the active imagination, in the slow, agonizing synthesis of your own contradictions. Jung recognized that the individual is the only thing that can stand against the collective insanity. But that individual must first be willing to be no one in the eyes of the world. The farce requires your participation to stay alive. It's a vampire that feeds on your yes. When you give it a no, or better yet, when you give it nothing at all, you starve it. You reclaim the energy that was being bled away to maintain the illusion of a cohesive society. And in that reclaimed space, something sturdier begins to grow. Something that doesn't need the farce to tell it that it's real. You are no longer a cog. You are a stone. And stones. Well, stones don't need to be social. They just need to be the danger of this descent. And Jung warned us about this, is that once you stop speaking the language of the farce, you might forget how to speak to the sane world altogether. But perhaps that sanity was always just a well-manicured hallucination. We are taught that the antisocial person is losing their grip on reality, when in fact, they are often the only ones finally feeling the texture of the floor. In the sprawling, sun-bleached suburbs of the Southwest, where every house looks like a copy of a copy, the act of sitting on a porch and simply being is a radical defiance. You are refusing to be a consumer. You are refusing to be a data point. You are refusing to be useful. You are becoming what the alchemists called the stone that the builders rejected. This rejection isn't a badge of honor. For the ego to wear that would just be another mask. The introvert persona, another role in the play? No. The real work is more anonymous than that. It's the quiet realization that the people you thought were your friends were actually just your castmates. And once you stop saying your lines, they don't know how to look at you. It's a cold wind, yes, but it's a clean one. Jung would have recognized that the farce is a collective defense mechanism against the terror of the individual soul. We huddle together in groups, in committees, in communities, because the weight of our own inner infinity is too much to bear alone. But when you refuse to participate, you are finally agreeing to carry your own weight. You are saying, I will not ask the collective to hold my shadow for me. That is the most social thing a human being can actually do. To stop being a burden on the collective unconscious by finally dealing with their own. So, when the next invitation comes, or the next demand for your input, or the next pressure to join the conversation, you might find that you have nothing to say. Not because you're angry, not because you're depressed, but because you're finally occupied with something real. You're busy being the person you were before the world told you who you were supposed to be. And that person, that original, unvarnished human, has no interest in the farce. They have work to do. They have a life to live, and the clock is ticking, and the light is fading, and there is so much silence still left to explore. So here we are, at the edge of the clearing. Jung would have recognized this final state not as a departure, but as a homecoming to a place that doesn't exist on any map. When you finally, fully refuse to participate in the farce, you realize that the antisocial label was just the world's way of trying to shame you back into the cage. But the cage is empty now. You've moved beyond the need for the collective's amen. There is a terrifying, beautiful autonomy in being the one who can sit in a crowded room and feel absolutely no pressure to bridge the gap between your soul and their expectations. It's like standing on a cliff in Big Sur. The wind is howling, the The waves are crashing, and you don't feel the need to explain the ocean to anyone. You just stand there and let it be what it is. This is the goal of the second half of life: to become so rooted in your own inner architecture that the storms of social fashion can't even rattle the windows. You are no longer antisocial because you are no longer defined by social at all. You have become a law unto yourself, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. The farce is for those who are still afraid of the dark, but you've made friends with the dark. You've sat with your demons, you've named your shadows, and you've found that the emptiness you were once running from is actually a profound, generative space. You don't need to perform because there is no one left to impress. You don't need to speak because the truth doesn't require a witness. You can finally just walk away from the noise, away from the scripts, away from the exhausting demand to be someone. In the end, Jung knew that the most radical act a human being can commit is to be fully, uncompromisingly themselves in a world that is begging them to be anyone else. The farce is over. The house lights have come up. The theater is empty. And for the first time, you are actually free to go.